The stars outside the great glass dome of the Galactic Council shimmered like frozen lights across the black ocean of space, and inside that massive room of silver walls and glowing symbols, creatures from 100 worlds gathered in quiet silence, waiting for Earth's representative to arrive, because today was not just another meeting and not just another speech. It was something different, something historic. Dr. Ilara Voss, the ambassador of Earth, walked slowly into the chamber, her steps steady, her expression calm, her suit a dark blue polished cloth that moved like liquid with every step she took, and across her shoulders hung a sash marked with Earth seal, a golden sphere surrounded by orbit lines. As she entered, every pair of alien eyes turned toward her. Some were large and round, others small and glowing, and others even blinking in strange colors, but they all stared and waited for what she would say and what her presence might mean. Alara was not afraid. She had been chosen not because of power or status, but because she could speak with both fire and peace, because she understood fear but never bowed to it, and because she believed Earth could find its voice among the stars. Her voice echoed across the council hall as she spoke into the translator. She spoke of unity and cooperation. She spoke of how Earth had changed, how war had become rare, and how humanity had grown from division to strength. She asked the council to allow Earth into the Galactic Alliance, not as a subject, but as an equal. She asked for trade, science, and cultural exchange, and she spoke about how Earth had watched the stars for generations, waiting for this moment, and now they were ready. The hall remained silent for a long moment after her final words hung in the air, and for a heartbeat the stars outside seemed to pause with them. Then came the noise, a whisper, at first a quiet rustle of robes and wings and tails, but it grew louder until the sound became a soft wave of disagreement. One of the alien leaders, an elder with long silver skin and glowing green eyes, stood and looked at her, then turned to the rest of the chamber and spoke in his own language. The translator voice came through for the humans watching on Earth. He accused Alara of hiding Earth's true nature. He claimed that humans were violent, chaotic, and unpredictable. He said the galaxy could not risk welcoming such a world into their shared space, and that Earth's past was filled with darkness they could not ignore. Alara stepped forward, her voice still calm but firm. She admitted Earth had a painful past, but said that pain had shaped them and that they had learned from it. She said humanity had fought its own demons and would now fight for peace if given a chance. More voices rose in the chamber, some in support, many in disagreement. And then, without warning, something happened that no one expected. A group of galactic guards stationed at the sides of the hall began to move quickly and silently like shadows through smoke, and before anyone could react, they surrounded Alara with tall, armored forms and glowing weapons raised. "You are under arrest," one of them said. Without emotion, Alara froze, her eyes locked on the nearest guard, and then she turned to the council and asked, "Why you are charged with violating interstellar law?" They answered, though they gave no proof and no details, just empty words backed by weapons. The room erupted into noise. Some delegates stood and shouted, others sat in shock, and some simply turned away as if they wanted nothing to do with what was happening. Alara did not fight. She lifted her hands slowly, letting them place the magnetic cuffs on her wrists, and as they pulled her away, she looked up toward the council. "One last time, this is not justice," she said, and then they dragged her out of the chamber through a glowing tunnel and into a holding craft that disappeared into the sky above the station. The Earth's delegation that had come with her was forced to remain seated, blocked by guards who held up weapons and orders and told them not to move, not to speak, and not to follow back on Earth. The broadcast cut to silence, the feed lost, the signal gone, and confusion filled every screen, from command centers to classrooms to crowded city streets. The image of Alara being taken away played again and again, and across Earth people watched in growing disbelief, then in anger. In one control room deep under the oceans, the United Human Command watched in silence. Then one officer, a young man with shaking hands, turned to the large central screen where the last message from Alara still blinked in red letters: "Ambassador, detain location WN." He pressed a button and the message was sent to the highest level within seconds. The entire Earth leadership was alerted within the hour. The president called a meeting with the Defense Council, Intelligence Command, and Space Operations Division, all seated around a dark round table lit only by a single ring of light above them. The room was quiet as the president spoke, her voice calm but heavy with weight. "We sent an ambassador, not a soldier, and they arrested her without warning, without law, and without honor." A general leaned forward, his voice Lo, this was not an accident, this was planned, and they wanted to test us to see if we would kneel. Another voice said, "We must wait, we must ask for answers. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe we can talk our way out of this." But the president looked up, her eyes like steel, and she said no more waiting. "Prepare the Black Fleet." The table fell silent again, and in that silence a decision was made that would shake the galaxy more than any war or treaty in 1,000 years, as the orders were sent out. Massive hangars across the Moon and Mars and Titan began to open and rise like great beasts waking from sleep. The Black Fleet had not moved in years, and many believed it would never be used, not in diplomacy, not in defense, not in anything, but now it would. Move silently, swiftly, and without a single word, the ships rose from their docks, sleek, dark, and invisible to most scanners, shaped not for peace, but for power. Their surfaces made of shadow metal that absorbed light and sound. Each ship was piloted by veterans trained in silence, trained in patience, and trained for one thing only: to bring home what belonged to Earth. And so while the galaxy watched and whispered, while the council argued and blamed and denied, the sky around them began to shift. Stars flickered, lights dimmed, and something unseen began to draw near. The ambassador was gone, but Earth was not silent. Earth was not still. Earth was coming, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Far above Earth, in a quiet space between the Moon and the stars, a small satellite blinked once, and then twice, and then its lights turned red as it received a signal from the Galactic Council relay. A signal it was never meant to receive, a signal that was not open or public. The satellite belonged to Earth's Deep Signal Watch Unit, a small team placed far outside normal orbit to watch for threats unknown and unheard inside the command center far below the ocean in a sealed base. The signal appeared as a bright line across a black screen, followed by one single word in large red letters. Officer Lena Cray was the first to notice it, her eyes tired from long hours, her hands resting on her console. But when she saw the word, her body jumped into motion, and she called out across the room, her voice sharp and clear, "We have a red flag incoming. Signal priority 1 redirecting to command core." All around her the room shifted from calm to focus. Screens flashed, lights changed, and the sound of systems aligning filled the air as messages moved through underground cables toward Earth's leadership. In less than 60 seconds, the signal reached the United Human Command Center, where the most powerful figures on Earth gathered. Inside a chamber hidden beneath the Himalayan mountain range, protected by steel, by code, and by silence, the president of Earth, a calm woman with deep eyes and silver hair, sat at the head of the long table, her expression unreadable as the signal was decoded and displayed on the central wall. The video began to play, and no one spoke. They watched as Alara Voss stood before the Galactic Council, her voice strong and her words clear. They watched her speak of unity and peace, of a future shared by all species, and of Earth's wish to join the stars. Then they saw the guards move fast like blades of metal. They saw the cuffs lock around her wrists. They saw her pulled from the chamber without warning and without defense. And then the feed ended, leaving only silence. For a moment, no one in the room moved, no one breathed, as if the world itself had stopped. Then the president stood and turned away from the screen, her voice low but heavy like thunder held behind glass. "They took our ambassador. They took her without reason and without cause. They did not ask, they did not explain, they simply acted." A general known only as Stone leaned forward, his voice deep and clear. "This is no mistake. They planned this. They wanted to test us." Another voice from the intelligence division spoke with caution. "Perhaps it is a misunderstanding. We must send a message first. Wait for a reply. Maybe there is still a chance for peace." Through words, the president looked at the room and raised one hand, and the room went quiet again. What they did was not a message, it was a warning. "And what we send now will be our answer." She turned to the commander of Space Fleet Operations and gave a single command: wake the Black Fleet. At that moment, across hidden bases on the Moon, Mars, and the icy rings of Saturn, encrypted orders reached silent crews who had waited years for this call. The Black Fleet was not a normal force, it was not listed in public records, and its ships had no names, only numbers and symbols. And their existence was spoken only in whispers between those who knew what real war looked like. The ships rose from deep bunkers, their surfaces blacker than space itself, and their engines silent as shadows. They were built for speed, for power, and for one purpose: to protect what belongs to Earth. As the fleet began to move without sound or signal, its path was calculated with perfect precision, avoiding known lanes and systems, traveling through uncharted wormholes known only to Earth's Best minds meanwhile, in every city across Earth, people watched the news screens where silence had become the story, where questions filled every corner, where children asked their parents why no one was talking and why their ambassador was gone. The name Alara Voss spread through networks and streets, and messages and memes and images of her face standing proud before the council began to appear on buildings and windows and digital walls across every continent. The people did not scream or shout, they simply watched and waited, and in their waiting something powerful began to build, not fear, but focus, not rage, but resolve. In a quiet control room on Europa, a technician monitoring deep space signals noticed a shift in gravitational patterns. Near a known council system, a pattern that could only mean one thing: something was coming, something large and fast and unseen. She tried to trace the signal, but it vanished before she could even lock it. She turned to her superior and Sadie, think. Something is moving through the dark, something that does not want to be seen. Back at the Galactic Council, the chamber was no longer filled with order or calm. Instead, voices clashed against each other. Accusations flew across species and fingers were pointed in every direction. Some said Earth had always been dangerous, that this act proved they were not ready for the galaxy. Others whispered that the arrest of Alara Voss had been too sudden, too clean, too planned, and still others began to feel something unfamiliar: fear, because Earth had not answered. Not a single word had come from the humans since the ambassador was taken, and in that silence something heavy pressed against the hearts of those who had once laughed at the idea of human power. In the prison ship, drifting near a council moon, Alara sat in a small room without light, without window, without sound. The cuffs on her wrists were cold, and the walls around her were smooth and empty. Each hour, she closed her eyes and tried to remember her home, the sound of wind through trees, the feeling of warm soil under her hands, the laughter of her brother, and the soft music of Earth's oceans. She did not cry. She did not beg. Instead, she sat with her back straight and waited. On the sixth day, the guard who brought her food said nothing as usual, but his hand trembled slightly when he handed her the small tray, and when their eyes met, she saw something different, a flicker of doubt, a moment of fear. She knew then that something had changed. They were no longer sure they had control. Far beyond that moon, in the cold silence between stars, the Black Fleet moved like ghosts, invisible and unstoppable, each ship linked by silent quantum signals, each captain watching and waiting for the final order. In the lead ship, known only as Arc-9, the admiral looked at the map of enemy systems and council strongholds and tapped a single point. That is where they are holding her, he said, and his officers nodded without question. No one asked how he knew. They simply believed, because Earth had waited too long to rise, and now that it had, nothing would stop it. The ambassador had been taken, and Earth had listened. Now Earth would speak, not with words but with action. Beyond the cold rings of Saturn, in a deep space hangar built into a hidden moon, the Black Fleet stood ready, its dark ships lined up like sleeping giants, their hulls smooth and silent, absorbing every beam of light as if they were made from shadows. An ancient fear, each ship was a symbol of Earth's silence and memory, built not for pride or show, but for the moment when words were no longer enough. Each weapon system hidden beneath layers of adaptive armor and silent technology, and each crew trained not to speak, but to act with perfect unity. Inside the lead ship, Arc-9, the admiral walked slowly through the command deck, his eyes scanning each screen and each soldier. He passed a silent man with lines of age across his face, and the weight of 1,000 missions behind his calm stare. The message had come 6 hours ago, and there had been no debate, no discussion, only one order from Earth's president, one single command, transmitted with no audio and no explanation. A string of numbers that meant one thing only: go. And so they did, without public broadcast, without ceremony, without warning. The fleet moved through space like shadows underwater, traveling through ancient wormholes carved out by human explorers in secret. Long before the Council even knew they existed, no words were sent, no threats, no demands, because Earth had already spoken when it built these ships in silence, and now it would speak again, through movement, through power, and through what would come next. Back on Earth, the skies remained calm, but the cities felt strange, as if the air itself was waiting for something, a kind of quiet before a storm made not of wind, but of history. People gathered in homes and halls, watching old broadcasts of Ambassador Alara Voss speaking in past interviews, remembering her kindness, her strength, and her quiet courage. Across screens, her voice echoed, "We are ready to grow and to share. We seek peace, but we will never kneel." That phrase began to spread across the networks. Printed on walls, shared in messages, and whispered between strangers on trains and in markets, "We will never kneel." It became more than words, it became a promise. In the orbit of a council moon, the prison that held Alara Voss remained still, its walls thick and guarded by drones and scanners that watched every signal, every particle, every breath inside her small cell. Alara remained calm, her body tired, but her mind sharp. She had counted the hours, counted the steps of her guard, counted the moments of silence between the sounds of distant engines. She knew Earth would not forget her. She knew something would come, not in rage, but in certainty, because she had seen the quiet resolve in the eyes of those who had built the Black Fleet with hands that had once tilled Earth's soil and now shaped the future of stars on the Council. Homeworld chaos had begun to stir as new reports arrived of power disruptions along trade routes, of sensor blackouts in old sectors, and of strange signals that could not be traced. The council leaders met behind sealed doors, arguing and shouting, some calling for calm, others warning of consequences they could not yet see. They had expected Earth to complain, maybe to beg, maybe to send diplomats and words. But they had not expected this. They had not expected silence. They had not expected nothing, and in that nothing they began to feel something new, something sharp and cold. Doubt. One young counselor from the Nari species, a race of thinkers and planners, looked at the gathered elders and asked, "Why do we feel afraid when Earth says nothing? Why do we feel smaller now than when they shouted?" No one answered, because they did not know. In deep space near the edge of the Council territories, a lone scout ship drifted silently, its crew unaware of what had entered their region until it was too late. One moment the stars were normal, the next they blinked and shifted, and from the dark, three black shapes appeared, not attacking, not speaking, just watching, and then vanishing as quickly as they came. The scout ship tried to send a message, but the signal failed, and the system went dark for 7 minutes. When it returned, the crew found nothing, no damage, no warning, only a single line of human code burned into their navigation screen. "She is not yours." They returned to the council homeworld in silence and delivered the message to the council, who stared at the code and said nothing because they knew what it meant. Back inside Arc 9, the Admiral looked at the map of the prison moon, its defense grids, its shield patterns, and its shift schedules, all gathered through silent satellites placed years ago in case of betrayal. He spoke only once to his officers, "We move now," and they moved. The Black Fleet emerged not from the front, but from below, from the dark side of the moon, where sensors were blind for 12 seconds, every orbit a gap the council thought too small to matter. But Earth had built its strategy around small things, and in those 12 seconds, the first wave of drones entered the shield, using frequency folds to pass through without a spark or sound. Then came the infiltration pods, landing like feathers on the surface, releasing silent units that moved with precision, cutting power lines and disabling cameras with electric pulses inside the prison. The lights dimmed, the air system slowed, and the drones guarding the cells shut down one by one, as if falling asleep. Alara Voss opened her eyes as the door to her cell slid open, and a figure stepped in, covered in black armor, with no markings, no face, no name. The figure reached out, and she took the hand. Without speaking, she followed. Without question, they moved through the halls as lights flickered and alarms remained silent. Every guard unconscious, but unharmed, every system quiet. Outside, the Black Fleet hovered just beyond the sensors, waiting in stillness, ready to strike if needed, but hoping not to, because Earth did not want war, it wanted respect. As the shuttle carrying Alara Voss lifted from the prison surface and returned to Arc 9, a single signal was sent from the fleet to the Council, encrypted and silent. "We have recovered our own. We suggest you do not forget." No name was signed, no threat was added, just truth back. On the Council homeworld, the message arrived, and no one spoke for a long time. Then one elder said, "They never even fired a shot." Another whispered, "They did not need to." The President of Earth stood once more before the United Human Command and nodded. "The ambassador is safe." The room exhaled for the first time in days, but the President did not smile. "This is not the end," she said. "This is only the beginning, because now the galaxy knows, Earth remembers, Earth waits, Earth moves, and Earth never kneels." The walls around Alara Voss were made of stone and silence, cold and smooth, without color or pattern, like they had been shaped not by builders, but by machines that had forgotten how to care. She sat in the center of the small room, legs crossed, hands resting on her knees, her back straight, not because she had to, but because she chose to, because she was the ambassador of Earth. And even if no one here treated her like one, she would not forget who she was. There were no windows in the room, no lights, except a soft pulse from the ceiling that changed color slowly moving from pale blue to gray and back again, as if mocking the passing of time that no longer had meaning. Each morning a tray would slide through a panel in the wall holding tasteless food in soft cubes, and a small container of water, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, always flavorless, always the same. Alara would eat slowly, not because she needed to, but because it helped her think, helped her stay focused and connected to the rhythm of a world she could not see. No guards spoke to her. They only entered to check her restraints or scan the room for changes, moving like statues on a schedule that never shifted, never faltered, never felt human. The silence pressed against her ears. Sometimes heavier than the cold, it crept into her thoughts, tried to twist them, tried to remind her that she was alone, that no one was coming, that she had been forgotten. But she knew better, because Earth did not forget anymore. She had been told before leaving that the council was divided, that some species feared Earth and others admired it, that there were those who wanted peace and those who wanted control. And now she saw the truth in that her arrest had not come from justice. It had come from fear, and fear did not last forever. In the hours between sleep and wake, she would close her eyes and see the skies of Earth again, the slow rise of the sun over the oceans, the green of the forests, and the soft hum of life around her home. She would hear the voices of her people, not loud, but strong voices that believed in something greater, voices that had climbed through war and darkness and pain to reach the stars. She remembered her father's words before she left Earth: speak with fire, but carry peace in your hands, and never forget that silence can be louder than any war. She smiled when she thought of that, because now silence was all she had, and yet somewhere in that silence, she could feel something. A tremor, a change, a whisper that moved through the walls like air through stone. On the fifth day, a new figure entered her cell, not a guard, not a council official, but someone different, his clothes marked with a symbol she did not recognize, his eyes sharp and calculating like a predator that had just found something worth chasing. He introduced himself as an investigator, said he was from a branch of the council that handled special cases, said her arrest was being reviewed, said he had some questions. He asked her if she had brought weapons to the council. She said no. Asked if Earth had plans to build secret bases near council space. She said no. Asked if Earth had shared its technology with hostile species. She said no. He leaned closer and asked if Earth had created the Black Fleet. She did not answer. He stared at her for a long time, then smiled and left the room without another word. Later that night, the lights in her cell flickered for the first time since her capture, once, twice, 3 times, and then went still again. She counted the seconds between the flickers: 7 seconds, 11 seconds, 14 seconds. It was not a system error, it was a message. Someone was near. She pressed her hand against the floor, feeling for vibration, for heat, for change, and found nothing. But her heartbeat grew faster, not from fear, but from knowing she was not alone outside the prison station. The guards had changed shifts 3 times, but the last group arrived 1 minute late, and no one asked why, because no one noticed. The drones that flew across the outer walls still moved in perfect rhythm, but their internal clocks were now half a second behind, and no one checked. The supply ship that had docked that morning had 1 extra crate, and no one opened it because the manifest was clear inside that crate. Something watched, something breathed, something waited in the council chambers. The news of small disruptions was beginning to spread. Strange power readings along trade routes, cargo ships missing for seconds, only to reappear again without explanation, and 1 scout probe that had vanished then returned with its memory wiped clean. The council tried to calm the chambers, but words were not enough now, because fear had a taste, and it was spreading fast. They sent another investigator to Alara's cell, this one younger and more careful. He asked her why Earth had sent no message since her arrest. She said Earth was listening. He asked if Earth would attack. She said Earth would respond. He asked what she meant, and she simply said wait. Back inside the cell, she sat still, eyes closed, ears open, counting again. 5 steps outside her door, 2 mechanical clicks, 1 pause, then silence. Not the silence of routine, the silence of change. Outside her cell, beyond the sealed doors, the walls began to shift as hidden lines pulsed with energy, lines no one had seen before, lines placed years ago when Earth first arrived in the system, lines meant for one purpose only: to open a path. And now they did, with no sound and no flash. A panel in her wall slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel with soft blue light, and a figure standing within, dressed in black armor, with no markings, no name, no words. He reached out a hand. She took it without hesitation. They moved together through the tunnel through systems that had been asleep and now remembered their purpose as doors opened without keys and locks clicked open without commands behind them. Nothing changed. The cameras stayed on, the guards stayed blind, the alarms stayed quiet because Earth had built silence into the stars, and now it was using it. As they reached the extraction bay, the small ship waited, cloaked in a shimmer of bending light, its engines humming like a song that could not be heard, only felt. She entered the ship and sat in the seat prepared for her hands resting calmly on her lap, her eyes closed again, not from fear, but from peace, because she knew now she was going home and the galaxy was watching. The darkness above the council moon looked the same as it always had, filled with stars and drifting light and cold dust moving through the endless sky in patterns older than memory, but something had changed. Something new was hiding just beyond the edges of what the scanners could reach. Inside the command tower of the orbital prison, the guards followed their schedules with lazy attention, checking screens that showed nothing unusual, reviewing files that had already been reviewed, and walking past doors that never opened. They did not see the small flicker in the northern sky, or the way the stars there blinked too fast, or the shape that moved like a shadow beneath the rings of the nearby gas giant. They did not hear the silent voice that passed between the ships of the Black Fleet, a voice that used no words, only thought and rhythm and shared intent. Each ship floated in perfect silence, black hulls absorbing every light signal, every detection beam, every possible warning they could have triggered. Each ship had already mapped the entire prison system, every hallway, every tunnel, every escape route, and every weakness that had never been tested because no one had ever dared test them before. From the lead vessel Arc 9, the Admiral watched the screen showing the prison station and the space around it, his eyes calm, his breath steady, and his voice silent, because there was no need for sound when everyone already knew what came next. The mission was not war, the mission was not revenge, the mission was recovery, the mission was return. The Black Fleet had arrived back inside the council chamber, located on the homeworld far away from the moon. News had already reached the leaders that something unknown had entered orbit around the prison. A signal had been sent by one of their satellites, but it had returned scrambled and broken, and now their long-range sensors were blind. The head of planetary defense spoke into the chamber with panic in his voice, saying, "We do not know how many there are. We do not know how they got here. We only know they are here now, and they are silent." Some leaders demanded immediate retaliation, others called for emergency meetings, and a few wise ones simply sat in silence thinking of what it meant that Earth had not sent a message, that Earth had not made a speech, that Earth had simply arrived. They tried again to contact the ships in orbit, but there was no reply because the Black Fleet did not respond to words, only action. Inside the prison control room, a technician noticed a sudden drop in power from Sector 4 and called it in, but before the message could be finished, the communication lines went dark and the backup systems activated. Then the cameras began to fail one by one, with no pattern, no sound, no damage, just black. A red light blinked on the control panel indicating a fault in the main power core, but when the engineer checked it, everything read normal, and yet the core temperature was dropping. And then the lights went out, not slowly, not with warning, just gone. Darkness filled the halls and rooms of the prison station, and silence followed as the sound of air systems slowed, and the hum of engines stopped, and the heartbeat of the building froze. The guards tried to use their comms, but heard only static. They tried to open emergency doors, but the locks had already shifted into override. And then they saw something move in the halls, figures dressed in armor darker than night, without faces, without names. Without hesitation, they moved without sound through the corridors, using hidden passages and mapped layouts that no one should have known, because no one outside the council had ever seen those blueprints. And yet here they were. Guards were taken down with soft charges and electric pulses. No deaths, no blood, only sleep. Systems were disabled with precision, not chaos. And by the time the main security team realized they were under attack, the rescue team had already reached the extraction point. With Alara Voss walking beside them, she was calm, her face set like stone, her eyes holding something that made even the soldiers around her feel small, something deeper than anger, conviction. They reached the ship that waited with open doors and soft lights and no markings, just purpose, and she stepped inside. Without looking back from orbit, the Black Fleet adjusted its position, aligning not in a line of attack, but in a ring of protection, each ship facing outward, forming a shell around the prison moon, as if daring anyone to come closer. Inside Arc 9, the Admiral sent one transmission to the Council using a code that had not been used in generations, a diplomatic signal of finality. We have retrieved our representative. We will now depart. If interference follows, we will respond. No name was signed, no threat added, just truth. Back in the council chamber, the message appeared on the central screen, and the room went silent. No one spoke for several minutes because they understood something that words could not explain. Earth had entered the stars not with noise, not with war, but with discipline and strength. And now the galaxy saw it clearly for the first time. The prison moon showed no damage, the guards were not harmed, and yet everything had changed because power had shifted and Earth had not even raised its voice. As the Black Fleet turned and began to move away from the moon, sensors across nearby systems came back online one by one, and the stars returned to normal, and the silence began to fade. The council sent one last message, a request for communication, a plea for understanding, a quiet offer to open new talks. The Black Fleet did not reply because it was not needed. Alara Voss sat in the command room of the ship that carried her home, her eyes watching the stars grow brighter as the ship moved faster than light, and behind her the soldiers stood like statues, silent and respectful. She turned to the officer nearest to her and asked one question: "How did you know where to find me?" Mayhay answered with no smile, but with pride: "We never lost you." As the fleet vanished from council space and re-entered human territory, news of the rescue spread across the galaxy, and every species that once thought of Earth as distant and weak began to question what else they had misunderstood. Ambassadors from smaller worlds began to reach out to Earth with quiet curiosity and cautious respect, seeking to learn more about the species that did not roar but still made the stars listen on Earth. When the people saw Alara return, the cities erupted with light and sound, not for celebration only, but for meaning. The image of her stepping from the ship, surrounded by silence, became the most shared picture in history, and beneath that image 5 words appeared across every screen, across every street, across every heart: Earth has spoken without fear. The chamber on Trelos Prime was colder than usual, lined with silver walls and tall blue windows that reached to the ceiling, where artificial stars shimmered quietly. In a digital night, the Council of 12 sat in silence around a long circular table shaped like a spiral, each chair made from rare elements of their homeworlds, glowing softly in hues that marked their origin. No one dared speak first, not even the High Chancellor, whose word had always carried weight like a mountain. Now that weight felt hollow, as if a mountain had cracked from within. The capture of Earth's ambassador had been discussed, the decision had been debated and finalized and enforced, but no one had expected what followed: not the silence, not the fleet, not the precision, and certainly not the escape that had left them all watching their monitors. As Earth's dark ships faded from view like ghosts in deep water, there had been no weapons fired, no cities lost, no lives taken, yet something worse had happened. Something they could not name. They had been made small. The envoy from the Cerny Alliance shifted in his chair, long neck bending toward the center, as his voice finally broke the silence like glass. "We believed Earth could be shaped like others before. Then we believed pressure would bend them toward obedience. We believed wrong." Whispers moved around the table, words traded behind tentacles and fur and hard metal. Masks of species evolved across countless light years. Some were afraid, others angry, and some quietly intrigued. The Krell Warden pounded a fist on the table, a heavy thud that silenced the murmurs. He wore the armor of a warrior nation, and his teeth were bared in a snarl. "They humiliated us, not with weapons, not with numbers, but with discipline and strategy. They walked into the heart of our system and took what was theirs without our permission." Another member, a delicate being of floating light from the Celestri cluster, offered a softer reply: "Perhaps it was never ours to take. Perhaps our mistake was thinking they did not see." The Chancellor finally leaned forward, tapping his clawed fingers against the table edge. He had led the Galactic Council for 3 decades and had never once faced such shame. "We must decide what this means," he said, "not only for Earth, but for us back on Earth." The response had been different. No speeches of victory, no shows of power, no parades or banners, just silence and focus in a secure chamber beneath the United Federation complex. Leaders from every human colony gathered around a single display showing the final frame of Alara stepping off the recovery vessel. The image had already reached every human system, broadcast not for ego, but for clarity. "This is who we are." Alara stood before the council, a woman who had seen the edge of betrayal and walked through it, still standing, still watching, still listening. She held a presence not built on fear, but on something older, something like gravity, a I do not seek revenge, she said. I do not want war or blood or silence. What I want is understanding. She paced slowly, hands behind her back, voice steady. They took me because they believed they could. They believed we would bend. They believed the stories about us, the ones written by others, and not by us. She turned to the council. We will not let others define us ever again. A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the room, but not from loud voices, from quiet ones, thoughtful ones, the kind that carry truth like seeds at the outer edges of human space. In a research station orbiting the mineral moon of Ida 9, a group of xenologists gathered around a new report intercepted by long-range scouts who had picked up strange energy signals near the border of the Cerny zone. The signals were not weapons, not ships, not communication pulses. They were old, ancient echoes buried beneath solar winds and radiation belts. A young scientist named Ren adjusted the screen and zoomed in, showing a repeating pattern, something like a message, something like a warning. He turned to his mentor, a graying woman named Kira, who had seen first contact with 4 different civilizations. This is not from the council. Kira nodded, her face unreadable. No, she said, this is something older, something they forgot. Back at the Galactic Council chamber, decisions were being made in whispers. Some members suggested re-establishing relations with Earth, others pushed for sanctions or isolation or even preemptive action, though their words were weak. The Chancellor silenced them all with a gesture. We lost control, not of Earth, but of our own arrogance. He looked at each of them with tired eyes. The question is not what to do about Earth. The question is what Earth will do about us. At the same moment, in a quiet room in New Geneva, Alara sat with a child barely 10 years old who had written her a message on paper, not digital, not sent through the web, but real paper. The child had drawn a picture of her standing in front of a tall, dark ship with stars around her and words beneath the drawing. You came home. Alara smiled gently. She spoke not as a diplomat, not as a soldier, but as someone who had once been young and curious and hopeful. We always come home. Outside the windows of New Geneva, orbital ships moved in quiet patterns. Workers repaired old satellites and students studied stellar maps. Children played in parks and no one cheered, because this was not a time for cheering. It was a time for remembering. At the edge of known space, something stirred. Something that had not moved in a long time, not since the days before the council, not since before memory itself. A signal was sent toward Earth, not by any species, no, not by any group named. It spoke in a code that predated machines and stars, a language of light and pattern and pause. It said, we see you, and then we remember. Back in the Federation complex, the signal arrived, decoded by machines and confirmed by minds older than any currently in power. The message spread quickly but quietly. Alara stood again before the council. They are watching, she said. Not just the council, not just the alliances, but others. Her voice did not shake. So let us decide who we want them to see. Silence followed her words, but it was not empty. It was full of weight, full of thought. And in that silence, the next chapter of Earth Among the Stars began, not with a shout, but with a question. What comes next? In the deep void where stars burned cold and time moved slow, there floated a station with no name, a structure forgotten by design, hidden beyond the mapped sectors, its edges cloaked in radiation shadows, its signals muted by old tricks of science and silence. It was not a prison, not a fortress, not a trading hub, nor a temple, yet it held something older than all of them, something that had not spoken for 1,000 years, and now it had begun to stir. Within the chambers of this place there stood a being whose form was more light than flesh, more code than memory. Its name was never given, but it had been known once in whispers among the first starborn civilizations, the ones that fell into ash before the council was born. Now, this being watched the galaxy awaken again, watched the flickers of human movement, watched the quiet fury of Earth, watched how they answered insult with precision and retreat with resolve. It watched, and it remembered. On the other side of the stars, Alara stood inside the archived dome of Luna 1, where human memory was carved not into books, but into light, each beam a record of a moment, a life, a decision. She walked among the beams, her hand passing through them as they played fragments of voices, old Earth songs. The first jump into hyperspace, the signing of the Unity Charter, and now the newest addition, the operation that brought her back. A child stood nearby, his eyes wide, as he watched her, his hand clutching a toy shaped like a patrol drone. Are you scared of space? The child asked, his voice soft. Alara looked down, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she crouched beside him, voice just as soft. No, she said, I am scared of silence. Why? Because silence hides things we forgot, things others hope we Never remember at the council chambers across the galaxy tension tightened, like wire no new threats had come from Earth, no messages, no retaliation, just one thing: a slow withdrawal of all diplomatic posts and a redirection of trade routes to new partners. It was not isolation, but it felt like abandonment. The Krell warden paced inside his war chamber, where maps floated in the air like glowing webs, his fingers dragging lines between systems as his generals watched. "They are not like us," he said. "They do not threaten, but they do not forget either." A younger commander, one with scars from border conflicts, asked the question they all feared to say: "Should we act before they do?" The warden paused, then shook his head. "No, because we no longer understand." Then back on Earth, a summit had begun, not among politicians, but thinkers, scientists, artists, builders, and survivors from every colony, from every background, sitting in a round hall beneath the open sky. No digital walls, no shields, just the stars. Above, the topic was not revenge, nor war, nor even peace. The topic was future. A woman from Europa spoke of growing cities beneath ice. A man from Mars told stories of dust storms and data farms. A child from the Callisto habitat shared a drawing of stars shaped like music. Then Alara stood again. "We were never supposed to win through force," she said. "We are not the strongest, not the oldest, not the largest, not the fastest, but we are the most stubborn." The audience laughed gently, but the truth hung in the air like a banner. "We remember pain, we carry memory like stone, we learn slow, but we never unlearn." She looked toward the stars, "And now we are being watched far beyond any charted system, in a place where light bends in impossible ways." A meeting was held among entities that did not belong to any council, their forms too large, their thoughts too slow for words. They had existed when the stars were young, and now they gathered again because one signal had stirred them, a signal wrapped in silence, but born from action. "The humans have awakened," said one being, a mass of molten crystal that sang its thoughts. Another replied, through pulses of gravity shaped like questions. "What do they seek?" The answer came not from any of them, but from a childlike echo. "They seek to be understood." Back in the known galaxy, strange things began to happen, not violent, not loud, but strange messages began to appear inside abandoned beacons, signals from derelict ships lost centuries ago, suddenly broadcasting coordinates to places long erased. Scientists from multiple systems scrambled to decode them, discovering ancient knowledge about energy fields, communication structures, and even forgotten star routes. At the center of all this was one name: humanity. The council watched in confusion and suspicion, believing Earth to be behind it, yet no evidence could be found, no patterns, no demands. Alara met with a small group of trusted explorers inside a chamber that had no cameras, only shadows and maps. "We did not send the signals," she said, "but we are the reason they were found." One of the explorers, an old man with a cybernetic eye, asked, "Then what do we do?" Alara replied, "We follow it." A new mission launched under no flag, no nation, no species, just one name on every hull: Unity. Pathfinders, their goal was not to conquer or claim, but to understand the new echoes, the ancient places, awakening the voices once silenced as ships departed one by one, carrying humans and volunteers from other species willing to walk beside them. A quiet shift began in the galaxy, not of war, not of politics, but of perception. Earth had changed, and so had everyone watching on Tralos Prime. The council chambers remained quiet as the Chancellor reviewed a report from one of their outer patrols. A report that described a derelict station broadcasting a message in over 50 languages, saying only one thing: "You are not alone." In the dark quiet of his office, he whispered to himself, "They are building something new, not an empire, not a weapon, not a wall mirror, and we are all going to see ourselves in it." Alara stood once more on the bridge of a small Unity Pathfinder ship, watching the stars bend before the jump engines prepared to launch. A young pilot asked her where they were going. She smiled gently, her eyes reflecting starlight where the silence ends, and with that the engines roared without sound, light folding in on itself, and humanity moved forward, not behind walls, not with flags, but with memory. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would those who dared to follow.